So keep this interactive. Do not hopefully let me stand up here and talk the whole time. I have just a few things as we get started. It is intended to be very high level. Anybody, everything in here can be a very deep topic in itself. So we could spend a half an hour, even a couple hours on a lot of the things that are in here. But it's intended to be high level. We'll take anything we want to offline with you, and we can talk about specifics in your guys' environment. I encourage you to do that with our team. I will try and avoid industry jargon and acronyms. So if you catch me or if you have a question on what I mean or anything, feel free to stop me and ask. There's a joke, I don't know if anybody remembers the old PCMCIA slots they used to have on laptops, but there's a joke, what's PCMCIA stand for? And nobody knows. It's a real thing, obviously, but the joke is that people can't memorize computer industry acronyms. So again, ask questions along the way. And sorry for the webinar, folks. We do have a lot of people on there, and we're recording it for anybody to watch after the fact too. But the live audience is the priority. So, quick agenda. I'm going to go over the current threat landscape, how attacks are coming in, a little background on what those attacks look like, safeguards that we've put in place for our clients over the last year and a half, basically since COVID, because we haven't had face-to-face meetings and we haven't had nearly the cadence that we'd like to. So it's just kind of an update on where we're at. It's not going to go over all the layers that we've put in place over the years prior. What we recommend to do to take things to the next level that are absolutely free and we'll do for you. If you're a client of ours and not a prospect that's here. And then what we'd recommend that does have some cost associated with it. And then basically just wrap up with some Q&A. And obviously, if you haven't grabbed some food or drinks already, feel free to do that. So the information in this is very, very real world. The vast, vast majority of it is firsthand from our teams, myself included, and our teams out there. The statistics are gathered from various vendors, news sources, or government agencies. So take those with a grain of salt. A lot of statistics are made up. I'll leave that to you. So here's one that I thought was interesting with that in mind. This was taken off of Fox Business yesterday. That ransomware attacks are surging and growing 93% each week. And North America has experienced a 32% rise in ransomware in the last 6 months. I have no clue how that math works because this is a very mature market. Blows my mind. But that's, again, take statistics with a grain of salt. There is problems. That's why we're here. So the threat landscape in general, there's been a lot of change over the last year and a half, especially as a lot more people are remote. Just tactics have changed with what hackers are doing. They keep getting better. The security industry in general keeps getting better. What we do as a company has changed a lot. So this is kind of just, again, a review, and then we'll dive into each of these a little bit more, and then what we're doing to address a lot of it too. So there's more and more skimming attacks coming. And that is basically, it used to be long ago, you'd have a keylogger on systems. And then the antivirus programs got smart enough to sniff those out. Well, now they've done lots of different things like, it was in the early 2000s, it was the toolbars that everybody added. And now there's a lot of equivalents to those with plugins for different web pages and things like that where, it's just, again, there's a game of they always change the tactic a little bit so that they can skim those. And there's a lot of ways that they're capturing keystrokes that you don't even know about behind the scenes. Cookie theft is another one. So there's a lot of websites that'll have a checkbox that says, trust this PC or don't ask me again for 30 days or whatever. And there's ways to steal those cookies that basically it's saving to your PC So then now if a hacker gets your password, there's no two-factor or double check on those sites that can leave you vulnerable. Hashing attacks are something that have gotten a lot better. So a hashing attack basically is a way to decrypt a password that's saved. If you save a password in the background, or if you have an account that's logged into a PC, you can hash the, basically break the hashing algorithm and get that password out. Used to be really hard because computers weren't all that fast. It would take a long time to run these decryptor programs. Now they're almost instantaneous. If somebody gets a dropper on a PC, it takes seconds to break the passwords. So that's a real problem. Better and more targeted spear phishing attacks. I don't think I need to explain that one. There's a lot of attacks that are launching from places that you don't want to block. So it used to be, long ago and far away, shady neighborhoods basically on the internet that you could pretty much predictably say, I don't want to allow traffic from there. Well, now they're, launching and getting smarter and evading getting caught at places that you won't block. I mean, there's just no way to block them. AWS, Google, they're in the United States. They're at places that you can't just block because all of a sudden stuff will stop working. Exfiltration of the data. So again, this used to be a little bit more straightforward, that you could block things that were, looked bad. And now they're using things like Teams and OneDrive and Slack and Dropbox and DNS queries to actually get the data out of the network without you knowing it, because it's all stuff that you trust and you're not going to block it. And again, more powerful computers that can do different types of attacks with things that are running in the background. Web shell attacks. This is a big one that's changed quite a bit with, I don't know if anybody heard of Hafnium. But that was a really big deal, where basically you can keep a web shell open and extract data from web servers. And then just this past week, supply chain attacks with vendors. There's been those for years, but the biggest one in a long time was Kaseya. They got breached, and it pushed down to thousands of PCs. So we'll go into each of these a little bit more. One thing with home, big question everybody tends to have is, it does lower some barriers and it increases the attack surface area, but it's not the end of the world. There's ways to mitigate that. And again, if you're a client of ours already, that shouldn't be the hugest, the biggest thing that you're worried about. So, what is the attack surface? And does it need to be a publicly facing server? That used to be the thing 10 years ago. That's what everybody was worried about. And the answer is, it can be absolutely anything on your guys' network. It could be an email with a link in it, and then all of a sudden your PC is the vector. It could be a printer, especially wireless printers. If you just buy an HP from Best Buy and plug it in that's got wireless, and you don't have it set up and hardened, that can be a problem. Could be your wireless network. If you don't turn on all the right encryption and the right settings on those, they're very easy to compromise. It could be a Mac or a Unix-based PC. A lot of people think that Macs and Linux and Unix don't get viruses. They absolutely do. They absolutely have vulnerabilities. And in fact, I would argue that in a lot of cases, Linux servers are more dangerous than Windows servers because they don't get patched as often. People kind of tend to set them up and then forget about them. It could be links or code that's embedded in what you think is a trusted website. And it could be software running on any PC. So again, those supply chain attacks, TeamViewer has been hacked, Kaseya has been hacked, SolarWinds has been hacked. We get a lot of Macs actually that get on networks that have dirty traffic that try and go out of them. So again, it could be anything, and it's just one device can start it. And again, kind of hitting on not every, there's some misperceptions. Apple's head of software admits that Macs have an unacceptable amount of malware. So that's straight from the horse's mouth. It's not like 10 years ago where they said you don't need to run antivirus on Macs. Hackers find a backdoor. Vegas casino fish tank heist. There was a thermometer in a fish tank at a casino hotel where hackers were able to get into the high roller database from that thermometer that was improperly set up. Issues are cross-platform. So again, going back to it's not just PCs, it's not just servers, it's not even Macs or Linux. It can be smartphones. So this is a common vulnerability chart of when all the vulnerabilities came out and that were identified and then subsequently fixed for Google Chrome. So who here uses Google Chrome? I'm gonna guess darn near everybody. And I am not suggesting to stop using Google Chrome because it's probably the best of the bunch and they do fix them. But again, it's on every device you touch that those issues are going to come up on. This is a screenshot from a website called Shodan, which is pretty sketchy. It is considered to be a good website and a good vendor that Fortune 500 companies pay for their services. They scan basically everything across the internet constantly. And you pay them to subscribe and check your IPs to make sure that you're clean. But they also index all the data around the world and tell you all the vulnerabilities. And of course, if you pay for a subscription, you can click on compromised databases. You can look for every server that has Bluekeep on it that's not patched. You can look for every server that has, all these different vulnerabilities and be able to sort. ICS is industrial control systems. Port usage is any open ports that are publicly facing. So there is a lot of bad actors who are enabled by them without even having to run their own scans and get blocked on firewalls. Pretty publicly, easily available, and again, very, very sketchy. Everyone uses DNS. So what we were talking about earlier with exfiltration, this is a attack that they identified. It's been a few years ago now, but this was the big first one with DNS, where they took DNS queries and the hacker figured out how to extract keystrokes and identify passwords and then send it in plain text. There was nothing fancy that they packaged that up, and basically every time you did a DNS query, it would just send an extra one out to this server that you didn't know it was phoning home to, and nobody's going to block DNS because then all your computers break and you can't get on the internet. So there's ways to block that, and we do, obviously, but something that a lot of people wouldn't think about, and if the network's not set up right, that's happening. So who's getting attacked? The better question is who's not getting attacked. And most of the time, it's not necessarily that you're directly being attacked, but there's just scans going on constantly and supply chains that are trying to be exploited, or fill in the blank on how they're actually getting to you, but they're getting to everybody in some way, shape, or form. The Department of Homeland Security had a report that came out in June that's 50% of or 50 to 70% of the ransomware targets in the U.S. are small to mid-sized businesses. So years ago, everybody thought I'm too small to get targeted. You're absolutely not too small to get targeted. Who pays the ransom? So the proper answer is no one ever should. And for a multitude of reasons. If you have everything set up properly, you shouldn't have to pay the ransom. But then second off, the big thing is it exacerbates the problem. If back in the 70s and 80s, you never negotiate with terrorists. That's what they are. Because every time you pay them, guess what? They just get more emboldened and they build better systems and the cycle continues. The numbers vary. Again, statistics are all over the map, but the general consensus is it's well over 50%. I've heard estimates as high as 75, 80% of companies that get hit pay the ransom in order to recover. And again, 99% of the time, that's because things aren't set up correctly. There has been a couple of real recent ones as a new extortion tactic that's come out, where they're getting the data out of the network and then they're holding you hostage for your data. So if you are able to recover it, they'll email you like 3 weeks later and say, hey, we've got these drawings that are really valuable to you or whatever. So one of the suppliers for Apple was Quanta, and they had all the renderings for the new model Mac that hadn't been released yet. And they said, pay $70 million or we're going to release all the schematics and drawings of this new Apple device. And of course, Apple and Quanta made a deal, and those aren't on the internet that I know of yet. And then the DC Police Department got ransomed, and I haven't heard what the end was on this yet, but basically they were going to release all of the informants if the DC police didn't pay their ransom. So there's a couple of new ones out there, but again, 99% of the time, it's that's not been the case, at least historically. The average ransom payout, $312,793. So big question is it all ransomware? And the answer is it is absolutely not all ransomware. It's the biggest thing that makes the headlines, especially lately. Hafnium, SolarWinds, and FireEye were 3 of the biggest attacks that I've ever seen in scope and implications in the last 6 months, and none of those were ransomware. Obviously, we were supposed to do this event in June, and my 6-year-old went to daycare and got COVID. So we had to reschedule, but since we rescheduled it, the Kaseya supply chain attack pretty much hit the top of this list, which was ransomware. So there is a big problem with ransomware, but again, it's not the only problem. There is a whole bunch of others. So while ransomware is a concern, it should not be your only concern, and we have lots of other angles covered. There is mass attacks going on right now on the accounting industry, and those are starting to subside because tax season's over, but that's not ransomware, and that was a huge problem where the Secret Service was working with both accounting firms and companies like ours here locally out of the St. Louis office. So I'll give more details on that later. So what's the skill level involved with their attackers? It varies widely. Some are very, very, very low skill, where they're licensing software, they're using services like Shodan, they're looking for vulnerabilities, they're picking on those vulnerabilities with automated programs where they really don't know anything. They're people who are sitting behind a computer, they're responding to emails on how to pay their ransom and how to run the decryptor key, and that's about it. So like the Colonial Pipeline hackers, there was a software that was licensed, but the actual person who hit the jackpot had no clue what they were doing. And then there's others where they're very, very highly skilled and evade detection for weeks to months and figure everything they can out before they ever get caught. And so again, going back to the SolarWinds and Hafnium attacks that happened earlier this year, they didn't know for months. SolarWinds has extended the timeline like 3 times now. Originally, they said they were in the network for 3 months and injecting code and learning what their client networks look like, and then it was 6 months, and now they're up to 11 months that they were in there undetected without having any clue. There was a couple of test nuclear power plants that a couple of security companies set up, where basically they duplicated what a nuclear power plant would look like. They even had the right equipment on the network that ran centrifuges and whatever else, and basically made it a honeypot to watch and see when hackers would get in, how long they would get in, what they were looking for, how they were scanning the network, and basically seeing what they were doing before they detonated the payload. So this is the guy who invented the industry, basically. His name is Punch, for what it's worth. And he was the one that started Black Hole, which was the first software platform that licensed ransomware. They basically got affiliates to sign up under them. They'd give them a percentage of whatever they made. And he wrote all the software, but then he also got to claim that he didn't do anything wrong. And so he was on the run for years and got away with it for a really long time. But they did actually finally put him in jail. So going to jump into safeguards. And again, just I probably had this conversation with everybody who is a client at some point. There is no perfect thing. There is no silver bullet. Setup matters. There's a lot of differences even in the same tools that we use and other companies like ours use. It's a bulletproof class approach. Everything's got to be set up right. You got to have multiple layers because at one point along the way, something is not going to fix it or it's not going to protect you. So that's why we have so many things in here. And I can tell you again, the setup of the actual stuff matters. When we, onboard a client who's already got WebRoot and we put our WebRoot config on there, there's a lot of times we'll start to pick up extra viruses that we're showing there. Same thing with WatchGuard to WatchGuard or SonicWall to SonicWall, with how we set them up and what we start to find and sniff out on the network. So network segmentation, traffic blocking, and alarming. This is kind of the first layer that we've really upped and changed what we're doing in the last year and a half. We've always done it to some extent, but we've taken it a lot further where outbound traffic is getting filtered a lot more deeply, I guess, for lack of a better word, and making sure that anything that shouldn't be getting out is being blocked. If a device doesn't need access to the LAN, we're trying to get all those moved off. There is, like the thermometer example at the casino, there is all kinds of unsecured devices that people put on networks and never think about. Cameras, phones, you name it. Thermostats, the thermostat that's on that wall right back there is on one of our DMZs. So getting those off the main LAN is a big deal. And then knowing what normalized behavior looks like on a network so that you can catch anomalies much better. We've got some traffic mapping that gives us outliers at 10% above normal or 10% above and 10% below versus what should be that 80% in the middle. So all these enhancements, if you're one of our monitored or managed clients, with the vast majority of you are, these we've rolled out. There's no cost to you on these. It's already done unless somebody's requested to have it turned off. So LLMR and NetBIOS are really, really old 1990s legacy protocols that Microsoft still keeps on by default. And those have been turned off by us. Microsoft doesn't turn them off automatically, but those are being exploited really regularly, and that's a way that you can sniff passwords across networks. We've disabled IPv6 if it's not explicitly used, which I can't think of a client, any of our clients that actually use it at this point. But because it's a newer technology instead of IPv4, where people are targeting it because most people don't set it up right, and people aren't scrutinizing it. BitLocker encryption on all of the hard drives that basically have systems that enable it. And so there's a little asterisk there. We roll it out automatically to any device that supports it. There are some old legacy devices that don't support it. Disabled legacy POP and IMAP protocols on M365 accounts. Those get attacked constantly. And if you don't turn those off specifically, they are very, very easy for brute force attacks to come in and then have somebody compromise a mailbox. We randomize our CSTL local account via script so that it changes on every single machine every 90 days. And there's not two machines on the network that are the same. And that way we don't get caught by hashing attacks. Spoof alarms for emails that don't match internal users. So the one that's circled in red, I've got two different examples here, but look at the one that's circled in red. Basically, so if I email myself with a friendly name that matches a different domain, it pops up with this extra box here that says, caution, this is an external email, they may not be who they claim to be. Because we've had a lot of people where, you know, CEO emails whoever in the company and says, I need a favor, I need these gift cards, I need, you know, wire transfers, whatever. So it's an extra one that pops up if the friendly name matches whoever's sending it. And even, you know, again, even if it's at a different domain, because the problem is it shows up fairly easily on Outlook, but on smartphones, it just says the friendly name. It doesn't say the whole email address. So it's an extra, hopefully something to stop people and catch them. We've set up enterprise and radius authentication on pretty much all trusted Wi-Fi. There are a few that we haven't gotten through yet, but that avoids a lot of different attacks with Wi-Fi. PMKID attacks being the big one where people can get on Wi-Fi networks. And basically, it ties it to your Active Directory. So even if you terminate somebody, or somebody leaves, or fill in the blank, whatever, if you disable their user in Active Directory, they can't get on the wireless anymore, so they can't do anything. The flip side of that too is a lot of people just give out the wrong one on accident. They don't know better. It's kind of funny. I rolled up to a healthcare client of ours for a meeting, and they had their trusted wireless, which had server access, written on the whiteboard in their conference room, which faced the parking lot, to where you could, I mean, rolled up in my car and I could read the password to get on the wireless, and I was like, guys, come on, we got to do better than this. So we enable DNSSEC on all of our clients where we manage DNS registration. There are some clients we don't manage DNS servers for, so those obviously get that advantage, but that encrypts your DNS records to where they basically can't be spoofed. We enabled MFA for all of our DNS and domain name registrations, so we have, there's a whole bunch of extra double checks on those as you log into those accounts now. And not even just standard MFA, we've got it locked down by IP address. We've disabled Outlook web access for thousands of mailboxes that don't use it. So, you know, real estate being one where pretty much everybody relies on Outlook web access, or we've got some trucking industry clients, some construction clients where there's people out in the field, but the vast majority, I would say, you know, 90% of people don't use Outlook web access. They'll use Outlook on a PC, or they'll use a smartphone or an iPad or something like that, but they won't log into Outlook web access. And that's typically where hackers go. If they compromise a password, they jump into OA, and then they start to set up rules, and they start to send emails. So it just takes that vector off the table totally. We block port 22 outbound, except for with very, very rare exclusions. That's one that gets picked on almost constantly because the way that traffic goes out of the network, it's encrypted. It's very hard to decrypt without causing problems. So that's one that gets, you know, there's a lot of compromised attacks that start to try and use it outbound. So we block that. We've moved clients to DNS servers that have DDoS protection. Again, that's the asterisk there being for everybody that we manage the DNS servers for. Port 23 is basically the same idea as port 22, not to the same extent, but we've got that locked down. It does not have nearly as much legitimate traffic. And then we've got lots of ports that we monitor for activities and anomalies. So here's some free suggestions on what we want to see clients doing and what we think can help a lot. And again, these are all completely free if you're one of our clients already. So block ads. 27% of the Alexa 1000, which is basically the most popular 1000 websites in the world, were delivering malvertising. So bad advertisements, basically, that went to places that they didn't say that they did. There's some reports, according to OpenDNS, that malvertising has taken over porn as the most common injection path. It's not just the bad websites anymore. It's what looks like a legitimate website. There's an example of one. Here's a few that showed up in different places. Look like normal ads. Basically, the link just doesn't go where you think they go. So there is a hang up. This is going to be a theme with just about everything in the security world. And we'll tell you, kind of how to be prepared for it and how to work around it. But there is a hang up with blocking ads. The big one being that a lot of websites will have holes in them, or they'll have a link that shows up as a white blob or whatever. Not the end of the world, especially if people are expecting it, and you just kind of train on, hey, this web page might not look right because there's going to be an ad that doesn't load, or people can't click on an ad. That's the other one with Google and Bing. The first few results are usually paid advertisements, and if you click on those, it'll pop up and say this is an ad. You just got to scroll down to where you actually get to the real search results, which, at least in my experience, usually has a better result than the ads anyway. So not the end of the world, but just being prepared for it. That is the hang up, and it's very quick and easy to check a box on our side and be able to start blocking ads. Email banner for external messages. So I mentioned earlier the example where it's the same friendly name. That we've got turned on for everybody because it has to be Seth sending to someone in the company, and then we're going to put that extra flag on there. Putting this on is a little trickier because we put it on everything. Basically saying it's an external email, open links and attachments with caution. Most companies are absolutely fine with it after you talk to them about it and explain it, because it does give people an extra heads up that, hey, it's an external message, be careful, scrutinize it a little bit more. We did get pushback, though, from clients where obviously that comes in at the very top of the email. Some people don't like the extra thing at the preview, and then they can't scroll through emails quite as quickly on their phone. So that's available, again, real quick and easy to turn on. That's what one looks like as an example, right up on the top of the email. And we can set exclusions too. So if there's emails that we just need to exclude for some reason, we can turn that on for, generally speaking, everybody, and be able to turn it off for one or two exceptions. Block file syncing and sharing apps that shouldn't be in use. So going back to that exfiltration tactics, Teams, Slack, Discord, things like that. If they aren't being used by your company and they aren't being used the way that you need them to be, turn them off. That one's a little trickier because obviously if you have a new project that comes up where you need to interact with somebody, you might have to turn it on after the fact. But anything that doesn't need to be there, we probably should lock down, because there's two sides to this, right? I mean, obviously there's hackers, which are the worst part, and you don't want them to be able to upload data there. But then the flip side is employee controls too, right? If and this happens, we've got it constantly, it seems like, in the construction industry, where people bring in their own Dropbox or their own OneDrive, and then they upload data, and they've got maybe some data that they shouldn't have when they decide to leave the company, and there's no control over that if it's not a corporate account. It's a personal Dropbox or personal OneDrive. So being able to have a little bit of control on those and put some policies in place. Multi-factor authentication. If you're on M365, there's a way we can turn it on that is absolutely free. And attacks happen on M365 constantly worldwide. So one of the great things about M365 is it's available everywhere. The bad thing about M365 is it's available everywhere, including places you don't want. So most of them start on POP and IMAP, which again we've disabled, except for in rare exceptions. But they still brute force attack all over the place. So if they do compromise an account, if you've got OA turned on and you need it to be turned on, you can still have that extra the 2FA or MFA. It does take a little bit to get rolled out, but it's not hard. So there are free and paid options. Anybody who's got it, we very, very much strongly encourage it. Free is better than nothing on those two options, and I'll get into the paid options in just a second. And the big thing is coordination. It's not hard to turn on again, but it's well worth it. Limiting logins by time of day. So most companies we work with, there is a core set of people who might work darn near 24/7. And then there is another core set of people who are very predictable, who will work very set business hours. And limiting logons to specific times takes out a lot of options for attack, because George is never going to log in after 6 o'clock or before 6 o'clock. And so we can just say, George can't log in from 6 to 6. And, all of a sudden there's at least one less place to get hit. Even if he accidentally leaks his credentials, it doesn't matter. It won't work 6 to 6. And then we've got, more eyes inside the network, more eyes outside the network. And again, kind of the two sides. If there are users who do pick up odd hours, there's ways to work around this, obviously, but need a little heads up. Admin account control. Our recommendation is to have all privileges taken away that we can possibly do, because if you have privileges, you can accidentally elevate control. You can run scripts in the background that you don't even know you're running. So rather than giving admin access to me, me as a regular domain user, and create a superset or an admin set account, so that I have to type that in consciously and say, yes, I want to elevate access. I want to do whatever I'm doing. And that's pretty easy. We've done that as pretty much the norm for the last couple of years, but there is a lot of networks we haven't cycled back through yet. And then so here is some add-ons that we pass through basically at cost, and the cost unfortunately varies. There's some that we do get some aggregated discounts for. Some of them are per client. So we basically pass them through at cost to you guys to just help everybody's security posture. The first one is, they've got 3 different industry acronyms for this one: TDR, EDR, XDR. Basically, at the end of the day, everybody's kind of calling it next-gen antivirus. It's looking at behavior, not at heuristics, or not looking at signatures like they used to. So traditional antiviruses can't catch everything. Never have, never will. But worse than that now, again, attackers are getting much more sophisticated. They'll hook into things that are trusted. So if you go to a website, or if you have a phishing email where you click on a link and it doesn't even seem like it did anything, chances are it's trying to run a script in the background, and it'll call a trusted program. So it'll call PowerShell, it'll call Outlook, it'll call command line, it'll call something that you don't even realize is going to kick off in the background. And because it's a trusted program, no antivirus is going to block it. We have application whitelist and blacklist. That doesn't block it, because we're not going to block Outlook from doing something. So it's going to look at the behavior and say, should Outlook be running this executable because it's an email application? And then it starts to get into behavioral analysis and help basically block those attacks. So it looks, again, back at processes that are being abused with abnormal behavior. It'll do forensic analysis on scripts and files and thumbprint them. So again, going back to, everything's got 2 sides to it, right? It's very helpful. We've seen a lot of use cases where this works great. The one thing that has thrown off some networks is, if you've got very, very custom applications that aren't off the box, out of the box, off the shelf software, those do have problems, because it's going to thumbprint those files every time it even runs a different script or an application or whatever in the background. And that's what we've had a couple of instances where we've turned this on for people, and the same application keeps getting blocked, and it's because it's doing something just slightly differently every time. But again, 99% of the time, that 1% aside, it does work really well. And they even actually add extra files on the PC that they call honeypot files. So that if they are being altered, it looks for that and then figures out what's trying to alter those files as an extra detection layer. And then to top that off, obviously we've got a lot of smart guys, but there's a lot of people out in the world that are a lot smarter than us. So we do pay as part of that licensing fee basically to use that. It's a third-party SOC, which is a Security Operations Center analytics team, to validate any files that they don't already have thumbprinted. So everything that has a thumbprint, it processes based on knowing that thumbprint. Anything that doesn't have a thumbprint, it stops, puts it on pause basically, analyzes the file with the security analyst, sees what it's accessing, and then allows it to resume automatically. So you don't know that. It's just, it might take 10 or 15 minutes to do something that should have taken 10 or 15 seconds while they hit the pause button. But it's still going to go through. Password managers, everybody struggles to have good, strong passwords. Nobody wants to remember them. It leads to weak or reused passwords, as well as passwords that aren't rotated as often as they should be. So, making them strong enough that things can't crack them is basically impossible. So the issue gets even worse when you need to share off, logins inside of an office where, the finance team all needs to get access to the same portal, and you can't carve out separate user accounts because vendor X is cheap, which is sometimes what it is. I know in our office we've got vendors where they have a Salesforce login, and they don't want to license everybody in our company for Salesforce because it costs them for each one. So we all share it. There's a million examples of it. So being able to share them and be able to set permissions on those shares helps out. And systems get breached pretty regularly. And again, this is outside of your control. There is absolutely nothing you can do to stop, LinkedIn or Facebook or XYZ vendor from getting breached. There's absolutely zero action you can take, except if you set a completely randomized password that's 50 characters long that you don't even know and you don't ever reuse. That's no problem at all. If vendor X got hacked, recycle the password, you move on, and they can't use that somewhere else, even if they've got your email or whatever else to try 50 other different websites to see if the password's the same. And it helps control employee access so that when people walk out the door, they don't know the password. If it's something that's easy and memorable and everybody in the office knows, that's a problem because they can walk out the door and log into that vendor's website. So here's an example of how they help. Once you know one strong password and have some parameters set on how you decrypt your vault, then you can just click on, generate a new password on the website and make it 50 characters long, use all different character sets, and then fill it in automatically. So here's a couple of examples of websites that have different parameters. You just have to look at what's the maximum. So in this case, it was 46 characters. This one only allows up to 16. So you have to kind of pay attention to that and then just set it for the maximum. I've got several passwords that are 99 or 127 characters, basically whatever the maximum is that they support. I click fill, I save it, and then I move on. And that way, I don't have to know, I don't want to know what the password is. It's completely different on every website. That vendor gets hacked. No big deal to me. I change the password to that one vendor and move on. So here's an example of sharing. You can set permissions on folders. So we've got a shared finance folder internally that we use. There's a challenge question. So third grade teacher is Johnson. And you can update all the different capabilities where you can set read access, write access. You can have read but not view, things like that, to where you can control those passwords and make sure that everything's intact the way that it should be for you. So 2FA, MFA, again, there's two different acronyms, basically multi-factor authentication. Same idea as password managers on Y. but it helps where you have internal systems and making sure that if somebody's password gets compromised, they give it up in a phishing attack. They can't attack your VPN. They can't attack your desktops. If there's a Trojan that's running in the background and it got kicked off in a script, they'd still have to have the token to say, yes, I want to allow the login. I'm trying to log in right now. And if you don't click on allow the login within, I think it's 60 seconds, then it rejects the login. So here's a couple examples, different rotating codes depending on the vendor website that you're working with, or again, a nice approve deny, so that you can just click on approve and not have to worry about typing in a code. It even works with different smartwatches where you don't have to get your phone out of your pocket. So the best ones use those push protocols basically, and that's some of the difference between the ones that have a cost versus the ones that rotate the codes. Wireless security, pretty much every business has it at this point. There are a couple of holdouts that we have in our client base, which is great. One less thing to worry about. But most people don't understand what can get skimmed from a wireless session or how things get skimmed and how wireless passwords are broken at this point and how easy that is. And so actually just this past week, I had a client who was at a hotel and got a certificate pop-up error on his phone. And I told him, disconnect from their Wi-Fi, use your cellular, do not connect to it the rest of the time you're there, it is compromised. So yeah, specifically any public Wi-Fi is just about the worst place to connect. Try and never use it. And the only time I would ever say try and connect to public Wi-Fi is if you're in a place where you've got absolutely no cell service at all and you need to make a phone call or whatever. Dense neighborhoods are now worse because of COVID, and people are targeting home because they're really easy to break in most cases. They're most of the time set up really poorly. So the learning lesson, definitely don't connect to public Wi-Fi. Almost all cell phones have data plans at this point that allow you to connect to a hotspot on your phone. Do that. Make sure that there's some messaging internally. Don't connect to public Wi-Fi. For Wi-Fi you operate, make sure that station isolation is turned on, which again, we take care of that for you if you're one of our clients, but basically so that two different computers can't talk to each other. And then the big thing that does have, this is where the cost associated is, there's new wireless WIP services that we can turn on a separate access point where we only have to put one in an environment instead of having, to have that premium service on all of them. But it blocks against the main 5 Wi-Fi attacks, which is rogue IPs, evil twin attacks, rogue clients, misassociation, and ad hoc networks. So basically a WIPS AP will block all of those from happening. Security awareness training, which basically you're doing simulated phishing attacks against your own people, and it helps train users. So if they click on an email that says, hey, your Office 365 password's expired, we need to reset it. They click on it, it tells you that they clicked on it. They type in their password to reset it. It tells you that they typed in their password to reset it. And that way you've got some data that not only did they open the email, but they clicked on the link and they gave it information. And then you can go back to them and say, hey, you shouldn't click on everything you see and you shouldn't type in your password. And commonly, there is people who don't get the message the first time and they don't think that something reset. The very first month we started doing this, we had one guy who clicked on the same email 30 times, but never said a word to anybody, which was kind of funny. So it's very trackable. You can tell when somebody clicked 30 times. You get monthly training videos sent out to you, and they are pretty cheesy, I'll be honest. But it's a reminder, especially for people who are not technical, It's extra messaging, and hopefully eventually it sinks in. Very easily tracked and reported for both internal purposes and also for compliance. There's a lot of things now where either, compliance bodies based on industry or SOC audits or vendor requirements or whatever, fill in the blank. There's a lot of things that they want to see. You're doing some type of security awareness training. They want to be able to track it that says, yes, I sent it out to every employee in the company and everybody took it. And then backups are absolutely the last line of defense. If you're a client of ours, your servers are covered. We take hourly snapshots on them in most cases. Rare, we might do a different cadence in rare instances, but 99% of the time, it's hourly snapshots. Offsites backup to a different geography on a separate network. So that's all good. The one thing to note that we might have a gap on is if there's any desktop that has critical data on it, or if it's critical to operations, we might need to make sure that that's covered. Again, servers are all going to be covered by default, but sometimes, if there's a production piece of machinery or something like that, then that can be something that we want to make sure is on this list. So, why should I do all of this? Generally speaking, it helps your security posture to prevent downtime. It helps with employee transitions and trainings and prevent data leakage. Most of the stuff, even the stuff that has a cost to it, is very, very inexpensive at the end of the day. It's what most people spend on lunch or a coffee to increase your security posture. Again, these aren't being marked up in any way, shape, or form by us. We just want to make sure that we have a better security offering for you and that you're feeling fully protected and that we're maximizing everything we possibly can. And again, going back to that compliance note, there is a lot of changes with compliance in industries. There's a lot of changes with compliance and vendor requirements, insurance requirements, whatever. So making sure that all those are in place helps downstream. And so this is a question I get, it seems like weekly at this point. It didn't ever used to come up, but should I buy cybersecurity insurance? And that's a question. I'm not a lawyer. I don't pretend to be a lawyer. I'm not an insurance salesperson. It's good to shop. It's good to make sure that you've got your options out there. I would, if your insurance person talks to you about it, I would at least ask. Many insurance companies won't write policies without a lot of the safeguards that we're talking about putting in place anyway. So that's something to keep in mind if you do decide to look at it. My answer has changed through the years. I would say, if you asked me 5-10 years ago, I would say absolutely not. You don't even need to worry about it. Again, it's an individual decision. Some people say it's nice to have an extra layer of protection. Most of them are pretty cheap, at least from what I've seen at this point. We've got clients ranging from just a few $100s a year to add it on there to a few $1,000s for employees with hundreds or companies with hundreds of employees. So pretty cheap just to get a little extra better sleep. So something to think about. And these are two that I would specifically look for if you are going to shop for it. Just as a side note, voluntary parting is one that's not covered in most cybersecurity insurances. And that's a big one that people give away money. They'll wire it to the wrong person for a fake invoice or fill in the blank, whatever. If you've got voluntary parting coverage and you wire money to the wrong place, that is covered. And downtime associated with an IT outage. So if you're down for production for 3 days and that costs you $100,000, that can be covered as part of it too. The outage itself, usually, again, not what I would be worried about. It'd be some of the other ramifications. So what to do from here? If you see something weird, say something and have somebody investigate, whether that's internally or if it's us on your behalf. We try to be perfect. We try to block everything that's absolutely bad. We try to allow everything that's good, but we're not perfect. You know, in the cybersecurity world, things are changing constantly. One of the quotes that I remember seeing a couple of years ago when Stuxnet came out was, the advancement basically blew everybody's mind so much that it was like an F-35 showing up at a World War I battlefield. So there are things that are going to change constantly. If you see anything weird, absolutely say something. Have us investigate. Have somebody internally take a look at things. Try and figure out what's going on. Evaluate some of the changes that are in here. Make some suggestions to your team. Talk, through what that change is going to look like in your environment, and make changes. Don't just talk about it. Don't think about it. Just make some changes. Hopefully, we can all get in a little bit better position. And that's all I've got. We're right at an hour. Yep. So yeah, so it's two-sided. We send out fake phishing emails basically that report back on who opened, who clicked, who shared data. So they get as many of those as you want a month. Usually it's 2 or 3 emails a month that are fake emails. And then they'll get training videos as well. And there's typically 1 or 2 of those that we'll send out every month, and then track who opens those, watches them. The training, it's an additional. It's basically around $2 a user. It depends on how many people get signed on to it, but it's right around $2 a user.
My past few months, I've had several suspicious emails come through. Part of that, you guys said that's bad.
Yeah. Most of the time, if it looks bad or smells bad.
If my users do that.
Yeah.
But someone would not.
Yeah.
That doesn't look right at all.
Yeah. Well, and any time that I would say there's a question, have them send it into our team, absolutely, to take a look at.
We're training on how to have that better.
Should. Yeah. There are people who click on a training email 30 times. So outliers aside, it definitely, the trend line changes after you look at it month over month for sure.
What's the status of biometrics?
So yeah, well, and at the end of the day, at least at this point, biometrics are all tied to passwords. So basically, it's like an automatic unlocker that types in your password for you. So it makes it one less password for you to have to remember, but at the same time, you still got to remember that password, because every once in a while you have to type it in because of some reset or whatever, or your fingerprint gets messed up because you got super glue on it or whatever. So
we have a plan for next week. And then they had it unimplemented because they are semi-HIPAA compliant, and it created a mess, a compliance.
Yeah.
Now they're reporting personal data, and yes, it was a big mess, so they had to get rid of it. So that's definitely a concern about biometrics.
yeah, HR compliance, it's a big deal. If you do, like, we had one client who wanted to do retina scans, and same deal, like once you have healthcare information, it changes the ball of wax big time.
Yeah, so you create a security key that can get hacked, reveal way too much about yourself.
Which is really what's on the internet out there.
Yeah. So I would say at this point, just about every insurance agent sells it. Now, whether they know what they're doing might be another question. So yeah, I would say start with your current provider. If you guys run into issues, we fill out those questionnaires as people are at least price shopping it. I can point you towards a couple agents that I know we've got clients that work with, but I would say stick with whoever your agent is unless you specifically want somebody different.
I think the rates are going up though, because of all that.
Well, so I would say there's two things going on. Rates are going up, although I wouldn't say that they're obnoxious yet, at least from the ones that I've seen recently. But the flip side of that too is there's a lot of companies who won't write it anymore. So kind of ironically, I don't know if anybody saw the news about 3 months ago, CNA said that they were no longer going to do cybersecurity insurance and they were dropping everybody forcefully. And then with like a week later, they got hit by ransomware and their client base got leaked for who they were writing cybersecurity coverage for, which was kind of comical. Not for them, but yep.
As far as the two-factor authentication goes, I'm sure there's a lot of different factors and ways to bring it about. But I guess on the surface, like, how does that work? Would that be an app that the user would download, or is it just like, kind of like it would text you a code or?
Yeah, so you can like you said, there's multiple ways to do two-factor authentication. I would say, if you're really talking security, the best way to do it is through a program like Duo or AuthPoint. AuthPoint's the one that we like the most personally as a company for a few different reasons. But basically, it puts a thumbprint, for lack of a better word, on your mobile device. And whenever you click log in, it sends a pop-up on your phone, or again, it'll integrate with a smartwatch too and say, are you trying to log in? And you click approve or deny. So you don't have to even type in the code, or you can default back to if you're in a coffee shop and you can't get a good signal, or you're on a plane, you can type in the code manually. Those are still there. But basically, that's, to this point, unhackable. With SMS texting, there's been a lot of exploits where those have been intercepted. Phone numbers have been ported out from carriers if you're really targeted heavily. There was I don't know if anybody saw Jeff Bezos's phone got hacked. So they were able to intercept SMS text messages from him and be able to authenticate as him. John McAfee's phone actually, kind of ironically too, was the same way. Being a security guy, his phone got hacked. Yeah, there's SMS texting, there's email authentication. I know there's a couple of vendors we work with that don't do anything else, and I turn it on for every vendor that supports it. So there's one that will only do email, but
So that would pop up at the Windows login screen?
yeah, actually, after we close up, I'll log out and log in.
With I've got my email on my phone. How would that work? Does that have any effect, or
So
emails or email?
email is separate for now. I would hope that at some point it'll get integrated to where you at least have to thumbprint the device.
Yeah.
But at this point, email, you just log in and go.
For some after hours security, like when everyone leaves, currently our employees, they just restart the computer, so it's just restarted and locked for the evening. And I think we have the
Yeah, you guys have got this.
Is that a good practice for them?
Yeah,
Okay, that's
Yeah.
what they've all been doing. Instead of just locking it, they've just restarted, and it's just so they know it's logged out.
yeah. As long as they are logged out or the session's locked, anytime you lock it, it'll pop up and challenge with this. So yeah, as long as they don't leave the desktop and yeah.
Yeah, I accidentally left myself logged into one of our other desktops, and it had left it on, and I was locked out and couldn't log back in when it had signed me out because it was left open.
Gotcha.
It's good.
Any more questions? All right, well, you guys, I think all know where to catch us. But, obviously put in tickets, talk to your account manager, feel free to reach out to me. We'd love to help, tighten things up as best we can. And,
Email me with anything company specific.
Yeah, absolutely. And feel free to eat up. There's tons of food and drink still. We're planning to hang out for at least an hour, so take advantage. And we'll send out a copy of the recording for everybody too.
Make everyone watch.
Yeah.
Apologize that I'm the only one.
Just text them.
And a waiter.
Yeah.
Hey, I don't know what to do with this, right?